All right, anxiety. Who gets nervous in interviews? You don't have to raise your hand because almost everybody does, except for these freaks in the 8%. I don't know what's up with them. But every normal person gets nervous in interviews. It's normal. So in this section, we're going to talk about, we're going to again review what's happening in our brains with the reptile brain and the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex and review that. And then we'll look at some strategies, some specific strategies on how to not let the anxiety take over. You may not be able to eliminate it completely, but at least don't have to be a victim of it and let it affect your ability to perform the way you want to in interviews. So let's do some background on where that anxiety comes from first. Let's say you're driving down the road tonight after this event, and you see this in your rear view mirror. What's happening in your mind and your body as soon as you see this? Lots of swearing. Even if it's not you, there's an immediate physiological response your body has to something like this happen. Your heart starts beating. You might feel that chill or flush that comes from it. Your palms might get sweaty. All that is automatic from some external stimulus. Just something happened, a little flash, and boom, your brain chemistry is all out of whack. And even if it isn't for you and the cop passes you and pulls someone else over, it takes a little while for those nasty chemicals to clear, all the cortisol and adrenaline for it to clear and have you feel normal again. That's a great example of the fight or flight and the type of anxiety that you can feel in public speaking or having to do an interview or going to a networking event if you have social anxiety. The problem is if you're in fight or flight mode and your brain stem and your limbic system, your feeling brain is running the show, then you're not going to be able to think as clearly. I had, in one of my worst interviews I ever had, I'd heard a story about the guy that was doing interviews that he'd asked these very difficult logic questions. And so I psyched myself out. I went in there, he asked me some problem-solving question with a machine that makes sausages or something. I don't remember what it was. But brain fog, I completely blew it. And I left the interview, and once the cortisol and adrenaline cleared, it was obvious. I was like, well, duh, that was really easy. But in the cloud of my feeling brain taking over, I couldn't think clearly. And that's what we want to avoid, is to make sure that you can still think tactically and be able to think clearly during the interview. I used to do, as I mentioned, lots of climbing in my background. And one particular kind of climbing always scared me. If you do, there's kind of two ways you can do a climb like this. You can have the rope secured from the top, like to a tree or something like that, and it goes right to your harness. If you fall with that kind of a setup, you don't really fall. The rope catches you immediately. If there's not a rope up above you, and you take the rope up with you, it's called lead climbing, and you place anchor points as you go, it's still relatively safe, but the catch is that each time you place one of these and clip your rope and then climb above it, you're creating slack in the rope. And so if I climb up to this point and fall, I'll fall twice the distance between this and the last anchor before the rope can catch me. And with ice climbing in particular, you got sharp points on your feet, you got ice axes that you're swinging into the ice. If you fall 6 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, that can be pretty dangerous. I had one friend that fell about 30 feet because he had so much slack before the rope could catch him, and he caught one of these spikes as he was coming down, and he broke his ankle. So because of that, I was never comfortable lead climbing on ice. I'd still do it, probably because I was a teenager, but I was scared pretty much every time I was doing it. I remember one time even there was a water flowing on the inside under the ice. It was a shell of ice around the outside, and you could hear it through the ice. At the bottom, it was nice and thick, but as you came up over the top of the waterfall, it would get thin at the top, at the crest. And I was swinging my ice axes and punching holes in it, and I could see through this little window the waterfall, and I had this vision in my mind of the ice collapsing in, and I'd fall in, and the rope would catch me, so I'd be dangling in the waterfall inside the ice. So those, and I'm a high neurotic from the personality section, so I have all these thoughts going to my head as I'm climbing. But you can't let the feeling brain take too much control because it's a tactical experience. You got to look for where you're going to place your ice axes, and you need to decide which route you want to take and how often you're going to put in these anchors. And so I found that I really had to manage that fight or flight response. I didn't want to get rid of it completely because it helps me to keep me safe, but I didn't want it to get me so I'd freeze or not use my muscles and technique as effectively. So I had to learn to manage those two things.